Okay. So once again, we've already talked about translation when we did our Google Translate activity. But the reason why I'm going to bring up translation again is in this unit called language, we've been talking about language as if, in a lot of ways, we're just talking about one language. But we already have had that discussion about other languages that a lot of you speak. And approximate estimates is that there's about 3,000 languages in the world. Some of them are disappearing. Some of them have disappeared. There's no real strong estimate for how many languages there has been in human history, but right now they say there's about 3,000 or so, okay? An interesting story here if you're reading the slide ahead. This actually came up fairly recently as well, this story in the US, that there was a United States senator who said whether or not, when the debate was, should the US Constitution be amended so that English is the official language of the United States, that it's the one official language. A senator supposedly said on the Senate floor, if English was good enough for Jesus, then it's good enough for me, which is obviously a incorrect statement. So the dangers of sort of linguistic chauvinism, in other words, having a preference for a language, having a slant towards a language, is another type of kind of prejudice that could be there, right? So having the ability to communicate in other language can give you another perspective. This is why for a full IB diploma, they require at least 2 languages. If words are just labels, and we just change the specific label, then translation would be easy, but it's not that simple. We saw that in the Google Translate activity. There are several problems with translation, and I'm going to go through 3 of them real quick. The first one is context, right? How is the context of a word as it applies to when it's being used important? So in this, you will notice I mentioned the word chat in English could be related to words like talk and gossip and discuss. And both the word discuss and gossip have very different contextual meanings, right? So in order to understand what chat means, you need to put it into a context. Like you can say, I was chatting with my friends. Does that mean you were gossiping? Does that mean you were just discussing things? It has to be put into context. So context could be a problem when we're translating a meaning. What about untranslatable words? Now, this would be more specific to specific languages. So, for example, in English, the word quaint doesn't translate well to other languages. Other languages generally don't have a good word that matches up with the English word quaint. And on the slide here, you can see an interesting German word. I'm not going to try to pronounce that one. An interesting Japanese word, an Indonesian word, and an Inuit word. Okay, I'll just start with that Inuit word, okay? The Inuit word means he does not know which way to turn because of the many seals he has seen come to the ice surface. So obviously that's a word that has a context for Inuit people that for someone who lives in Saudi Arabia, I don't see a need necessarily to translate that word. The word in Indonesian, the relationship among a group of people committed to completing a task of mutual benefit, that sounds like a pretty useful word in most languages. So the fact that the Indonesians have that word, it might be that might be a good word to start translating to other languages. And you can see that in the other 2, right? Improvements that make things worse, a feeling engendered by ethereal beauty. Those are really good words that I think capture a specific concept that we don't have a translation in English for. And then the third problem is idioms, okay? For example, in English, the phrase, don't beat around the bush, or he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, right? Out of sight, out of mind. When these are translated, they're often really badly translated. So that out of sight, out of mind was translated into Russian and then back into English, and it came back as invisible idiot. Out of sight, out of mind. And then another example, which you can see on the slide here, when Pepsi ran a campaign that said, come alive with Pepsi, when that was translated in China and then back into English, it was translated as Pepsi brings your ancestors back from the dead. So idioms where we're trying to kind of create a metaphor or something like that might not translate very well. So obviously, in translating meaning from one language to another, but even within the same language, it can be very difficult. So linguists say that in order to get as good a translation as possible, three things kind of need to be observed. Faithfulness. How faithful is the translation to the original? Comprehensibility. That it should be comprehensible, so that when you translate it to another language, you can actually comprehend what it means. And finally, back translation, which is what we did in our Google activity, where we translate from one language into another and then back into the original. And it should try to maintain as close a translation as possible. If we can try to maintain those three things, then we could say we're having a fairly good translation. So here's an example. In German, Guten Tag is good day, but it's often translated as good morning or good afternoon, which isn't the exact translation. And again, for those of you who speak French, you're going to hear me butcher this, but s'il vous plaît, if it pleases you, is usually just translated as just please. But really, a more accurate translation would be if it pleases you. Okay. Again, if we were in class, I would have probably asked you guys out loud to translate those phrases and kind of see how that went out. Okay. Now, as you go further into the slide, you can see an even bigger challenge would be things like poetry, right? How do we translate things like poetry, which is an even greater challenge to translate something at all? Okay, so moving away from the problems and the adjustments we make with translations, we also know that language can lead to stereotyping things. Language consists of two main types of words, proper names, general words, and therefore we can use words as a type of labeling system. It has an advantage by doing this. We can predict things based on labels. So if I said, I'm going to hand you an apple, by hearing that word in language, you can apply that label and predict what I'm about to hand you, right? If I said to you, this class is going to have a test, you can use the label associated with the word test and make a prediction about what's going to happen in this class. The problem with labeling is we mislabel things, right? We tend to put a label on something and then misclassify it in different ways. So, according to some philosophical views, labels are essentially social constructs that we place on the world, okay? So that's a very philosophical position. Others dispute that and say labels are more natural, that they've evolved from our natural sort of communication system, and that some of them are cultural in nature, and that they kind of have evolved with the culture. So can both of those things be true? Can we have labels that are natural forming, that are culturally forming, and that are social constructs? Can all of those be true? Well, that digs deep into the philosophy here about the way we as humans essentially describe the reality that we experience. When we are talking, when we are communicating, are we actively describing our reality? Or is our reality more of a passive description? Is it active or is it passive? And what role does language take in our view of reality? So I'm just going to pause there for a second, and I'm going to actually stop the slideshow to do a quick attendance check and give everyone a chance to sort of process what I just said. Just taking a quick look. I think there is a couple updates I'm going to make. I'm going to mark Ian now present, as I see he has joined. Don't see Kurt, I don't see Marie, and I don't see Wendy. Okay, but I have seen Ian, so I've updated Ian. You are now marked present. Okay, so let's jump back to where I was talking a second ago about the connection between language and philosophical reality. Okay, so we're going to get into this when we transition to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis, but I want you to start thinking about this idea that is language a part of how we see reality? And of course, I'm using the word see not in a sense perception sort of way here. I'm saying see in a way that we kind of have the same way we started this course. Is our worldview highly shaped by our language? All right, so before we get there, let's talk for a second about stereotypes, right? Stereotypes is that we put a label on something or someone that makes a lot of assumptions about that one. Like if I said, well, all of you kids are students, and maybe there's some stereotypes associated with students that could be positive and they could be negative, but they certainly maybe are putting you into a category, putting you into a labeled category that maybe you don't fit. Okay, so it's easy if I use stereotypes in a negative way, right? So if I say, well, Mario is Italian, so he must like spaghetti and he must like wine. Franz is German, so he must like beer and he must like sausages. That's a stereotype, right? I'm applying a label to a person, which could be true that maybe Mario is Italian, is an Italian heritage. And maybe he does like spaghetti and wine. But to put him in that category is, again, a concept of stereotyping. Okay, it's a concept of caricaturizing someone, putting them into a labeled category and then associating a bunch of properties on that category. Now, this can lead to prejudice as well. Stereotyping itself isn't a negative necessary word. I mean, you can stereotype your teachers as being within certain stereotypes. That isn't necessarily prejudice at this point. It can become prejudice if we use it in a sort of a negative connotational way, right? So there's advantages to stereotyping and there's disadvantages to stereotyping. We use labels because it has an advantage to us. This creates stereotypes, which could be useful, but it could also lead down a path towards making assumptions that could be very, very wrong. Okay. Now let's transition to this thing called the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis. Okay. What does this mean? And the SAPIR-WHORF is the name of the two sort of researchers who designed this concept, and it's a very philosophical language-based concept. Okay, so let's move to it. So according to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis, language does determine our experience of reality. Okay, we see and we think what our language allows us to see and think. So this is a big claim, right? That our language is a direct connection to what we experience. Sip of coffee. Okay. So here's the quick example, or the first example, that the Inuit famously have, maybe you've heard this before, that the Inuit famously have many different words that describe snow, right? Like if you went to someone in Saudi Arabia, they might have one word to describe snow, and it's snow, right? Or you know, in their language. They might not have another word for snow. Right? Even here for us as Winnipeggers, we might have a couple different words to say, well, there's snow, there's ice, there's sleet. Even the words black ice, when I was in Phoenix just a couple summers ago, and I said the word black ice, they were like, what's that? What's black ice? So I had to describe that to them. They didn't have that word in their language. So according to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis, because the Inuit have so many different words for snow, they experience snow differently than languages that do not. So by having different words and different language concepts for different conceptual things, it actually shapes language in that way. Okay, let me quote Edward Sapir directly. This is Edward Sapir, and he says, "The real world is to a large extent unconsciously built upon the language habits of the group. No two languages are ever sufficiently similar to be considered as representing the same social reality. The world in which different societies live are distinct worlds, not merely the same world with different labels attached. We see and hear, otherwise experience, very largely as we do, because language habits of our community predispose certain choices of interpretation." So it's a lot of educational or sort of academic wording there. But again, I think what he's essentially saying, and let me go to now Benjamin Whorf, the other researcher who looked at this. He studied the difference between the language of the Hopi Indians of North America and other European languages. And he had this interesting theory, sort of conclusion that he learned about studying the Hopi language. In the Hopi language, there is no word, no concept, no construction, no expression, no grammatical way to essentially refer to the concept of time. Okay? So let that sink in for a second. The Hopi Indians do not possess language for essentially the concept of time. No past, no present, no future, nothing about time enters their language. Okay? Now, this is a bit old study, so it's possible that the Hopi Indians have since developed concepts of time into their language. But imagine you grow up and there was no word for time. There was no word for past or present or being late or being early. All of those words were removed from your language in your life experience. So if the words for time and concepts around time weren't in your language, according to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis, your concept of time might not have been a part of your actual view of reality. Okay? So this is kind of a point he's making here, that they have no concept of abstract time because they have no words for it. So it's an interesting theory to kind of propose. I think some of you may have studied this especially if you've been in IB English, but if you've studied the novel 1984, in that George Orwell proposes something similar, that the government invents a language, okay, called newspeak, okay? And there's also a language called Ingsoc, which they use to control people, that they use language to control the way people think and essentially, therefore, their behaviors. So here's from the novel 1984. The purpose of newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the worldview and the mental habits proper to the devotees, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. So the government is trying to limit thinking. This was done partially by the invention of new words, but mostly by eliminating words they found undesirable. And if you think about it, in some ways, we're trying to do that in our culture, not necessarily in a negative way, but to remove words that we find undesirable from our language. For example, prejudicial words, right? Like, I'm not obviously going to start saying inappropriate words here out loud to you guys, but think about it if those words eventually just completely got removed from our language. Words that, negatively target races or genders or sexual preferences. If those words became eliminated from our language, maybe it could eliminate the thoughts behind those words. And the more those words are injected into our language, the more those thoughts prevail. So, as it says in 1984, the word free still existed in newspeak, but they shaped the word so that it could only be used for statements like, the dog is free from lice, this field is free from weeds. It could not be used connected to words like politically free or intellectually free, that the word would no longer be used in those contexts because the government didn't want people to conceive of those things. So in a lot of ways, that the novel 1984 kind of backs up the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis in the sense that we could shape our reality based on our language. All right, let's put the hypothesis to the test now, okay? So it's been tested several times. So in one example, anthropologist Peter Farb tested bilingual Japanese women, okay? So Japanese women who could speak Japanese and English, who had married American servicemen and were living in the United States. So these were probably during World War II. They had met American servicemen and they fell in love and they got married. And then they moved with the American military servicemen back to the United States. They had learned to speak English and they could still speak Japanese. So for these women that he studied as an anthropologist, because he had a large sort of sample size of women, he realized that they would speak English at home, right? To their husbands, to their children. When people came over to the house, they would speak English. But they would also get together as groups of Japanese women. And when they got together as groups of Japanese women, they would speak Japanese. So according to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis, the SAPIR-WHORF, I can't speak today, hypothesis, they should be thinking differently when they were speaking in their different groups. So let's say they went out for lunch, a bunch of Japanese women, and they were all speaking Japanese. And then later at home, when they were speaking English to their family, that during those two different points in the day, they were actually thinking differently, if the hypothesis was true. So they were going to test that. So they had a bilingual translator ask questions to the women in English and also ask questions to the women in Japanese. And actually what it showed was that their attitudes were a little different. So when speaking in Japanese, and they were asked the question, when my wishes conflict with my family's, the women would answer, it is a time of great unhappiness. That was their answer when they spoke in Japanese. When they were asked the question in English, when my wishes conflict with my family's, their answer was, I do what I want. If you look at those two different answers, I feel like they are very different conceptual answers, right? It's a time of great unhappiness. The concept of that answer versus I do what I want, by the same person, just speaking in different languages, could be some evidence that they were actually thinking differently while speaking in those different languages. And it kind of supports the theory that reality is determined by our language itself. Now, of course, there are counters to the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis that, for example, that the Inuit may have different words for snow because snow is more of a reality for them than someone living in Texas. So it's just a practical thing that they just need more words for snow because they experience snow more. But it doesn't actually change their thoughts. It's just that that's just what they experience. And maybe Texans have a lot more words for, say, a desert than someone living in the Arctic does. So to say that the SAPIR-WHORF hypothesis actually determines thought is also a bit challengeable because a lot of experiments say that thought can occur without language. I mean, obviously, babies, before they develop the ability to speak, have thoughts, right? I think that's pretty clear, that language can influence thought, but maybe that it doesn't shape thought. A baby can have a concept of numbers before it can speak numbers. It's hard to see how someone could understand multiplication, though, without having a language around a mathematical vocabulary, right? If you had to learn math without having words like adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and being able to conceptualize them based on that language, it might be difficult to move to higher level mathematics. So I think the theory has some weight, but we can certainly debate how much does the language influence our thought. Okay, wrapping up, and I am again very close to the amount of time I said I would speak to you guys. Language can persuade us. Language can influence us. Easily demonstrated by looking at language in the form of advertising, right? Marketing something as sparkling water would certainly market a lot better than marketing it as gassy water, right? When you fly first class, right? That sounds a lot better, right? Now it's maybe called business class or economy class. People didn't like the idea of being in first class and second class. It didn't sell as well. So now they sell it as business class and economy class. So people feel more empowered by the words economy class, like they're saving money. So that makes it feel better that they have less legroom in their chair, but they're saving money, okay? So let's consider language that has a lot of emotion built into it. Words like hero, peace, democracy, thief, liar, pervert. Those words have both positive and negative connotative emotional values built into them. Some words even are taboo and are used to protect things, like the word toilet, often expressed as restroom or bathroom. I know sometimes it will say bathroom when there's no bath in that room, or restroom, like you'd say to someone here at Sturgeon Heights, I'd say, well, the restroom is down there. Well, no one's doing any resting in that room. There's no resting going on in there. but we're shaping our language to influence the way people perceive of that. Saying, well, that's the toilet room, right? Something like that. Or lumber companies that use words like clear cutting or the words landscape management hides the reality of what they're maybe really doing, okay? So a survey said when people asked, should the government give more money to welfare? Only 24% of people agreed that people should give more money to welfare. But when they changed the language to, should the government give more assistance for the poor, the numbers rose to 68%. So 24% versus 68%. What about the difference between national defense versus military? Again, using our language to shape how it influences people. Second concept, weasel words, words that can be used to escape things, right? So we can intentionally structure our language so that we can't be held accountable later. What about grammar changes? So here's two sentences. Many villages were bombed. We bombed many villages. So obviously the major difference in that second sentence is the insertion of the word we. It implies that we're taking some responsibility for the bombing. But in the first sentence, many villages were bombed, kind of alleviates us from the responsibility of the damage of that action, right? So intentionally structure our grammar to influence the way people receive the message there. How about revealing and concealing? Here's 4 descriptions. I've invited an attractive blonde to the party. I've invited a cellist to the party. I've invited a marathon runner to the party. I've invited a liberal to the party. Each of those descriptions has a connotation that goes along with it, right? As I read the first one, an attractive blonde, what was the connotation happening there? Were a lot of you thinking of like sort of a physical attraction type of that? When I said I invited a cellist, conceptually, you were thinking of someone with musical abilities. The marathon runner, maybe someone who's fit. A liberal, someone who has strong political views. However, it's possible that all 4 of those descriptions apply to one person, that I was describing one person, okay? So could I maybe reveal all 4 of those things about someone who's coming to the party? Or maybe I intentionally conceal the fact that they're a liberal. Or maybe I conceal to my wife that they're an attractive blonde, right? So all of those things can be revealed or concealed to structure the way our message comes across. Okay, last point here. So what about how that applies in bigger contexts, like in terms of political context? So some of these could be very difficult for me to say and for some of you to hear. But during the Vietnam War, the American military used the term gook to describe Vietnamese people, okay? In the first Gulf War in the early 90s, American pilots would use the term they were going on a turkey shoot. Well, I'm here to tell you they were not shooting turkeys. They were shooting people, okay? That the Vietnamese, the word gook is a negative word. It is a prejudicial word. And part of the reason it was done was so that people could, in fact, do the things that a soldier would have to do in their role, which is essentially kill people, okay? And that's hard to do. It's not easy to kill someone. So by making them less than human through the language, maybe it made it a little easier for them to do their job. Here's a table. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but you can see some of the words that in times of war have been used by soldiers, by governments, by the media to kind of use language to change the connotation around the concept, right? If we say someone's dead, that is very easy to conceive of. But if we say they're no longer a factor, that means the same thing, but the language changes kind of the connotation, okay? The word genocide has a strong meaning, but if we switch it to ethnic cleansing, right? If we take the word invade, oh, Canada's going to invade this other country. What if we switch it to just the word liberate? okay? So as you look through that list, you can easily make your own examples up of times where this took place, right? It does definitely lead to a very common statement in historical studies that language is power, that we can use language to influence a lot of things, that it isn't such a straightforward, simple concept, that philosophically language is something that we need to be very cognizant and aware of. All right, that's my presentation for you guys on language. All right, now, leaving you guys now for the next couple days, I want to point out these two things I want you guys to do now, okay? There was probably more in-class activities I would have wanted you guys to do in this language unit for sure. We did a few, and I hope to be able to do some even in a remote learning setting, which we start our next unit, which is coming right up. So by next class, I'd like to possibly start emotion as a way of knowing. But what I want you guys to do is these final two things for, well, this is for language right here. This is the final summative assessment for language. But the other thing I want you guys to look at, this thing right here, it's time to start your process towards the final assessments in this course. Okay, so let me take a look at this. First, in terms of language. So in terms of language, this assessment is like the other units. It'll just sort of give you some things to look at in terms of the stuff you studied in this unit called language. So you did this with the other units. So you can go through this form and submit it. But this one, the phase 1 of the IB assessments, okay? For this one, it will have you read the physical document that I've already given you guys. This booklet I gave you guys about the IB assessment. So there's a link to it if you haven't read it. So it asks you, have you read this? Have you looked at the page about the essay titles, which would be this last page of this document right here? So have you looked at these potential essay topics that you're going to be getting to? So yes or no. Then it just asks you, what's the word count for the essay? What's the time count for the presentation? Do you know what a knowledge question is? Rank your sort of understanding it, and then rank where you are in TOK at this point. Now, obviously, for some of these, maybe like faith, where we haven't discussed it yet, that maybe you're going to rank as not applicable at this time. But maybe you have a different point. Maybe you actually have an opinion about faith as a philosophical concept. But we have studied epistemology, reason, sense perception, and now language. So I'd like you to rank where you kind of feel on this. So this isn't a point scale. It's not like this is going to directly turn into a mark for you guys. I want you to fill this out to start thinking and preparing for those final assessments. Okay? Whew. All right. At this point, I'm going to just kind of wrap up. I'll also point out that this schedule here, which I pointed out the other day, is for you guys, and you can see here is today, Thursday, language as a way of knowing. On next Tuesday, we'll be looking at emotion as a way of knowing. And we'll also be starting stage 2 of these final assessments by next Wednesday, okay, of remote learning. I'm only going to see you guys online twice next week, just on Tuesday and Wednesday, not on Monday, and not on Thursday or Friday of next week. So I'm only going to see you guys on Teams twice next week. So you have plenty of time to look through these there isn't a lot on your plate. If you are still wanting to do some of the things from the past, you should do that. Okay. And you can hand in that stuff by either emailing it to me. So if you're still doing that art activity, you could just take a picture of it and email me the picture. Or there's also a hand-in page on my website, but you don't have to worry about that one if you've never used that before. You could just email it to me. All right, I will stay on Teams for any questions anyone has, okay? I see Marie did in fact connect to Teams, so I'm gonna just switch her attendance. I don't think I saw that Kurt did join, no. And so I did switch, Marie, I did switch your attendance. And did Wendy ever join? I don't think so. Okay, so have a great day, guys. It's going to be a beautiful day again outside today, and I'll see you guys on Teams next Wednesday. If you have any questions, feel free to stay on Teams and ask. And you can always ask through email as well, or you can connect to me during the extra help time. Have a great day, everybody. Oh, wait, I want to turn off sharing. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll see you guys next Wednesday.
Bye, Mr. Walks.